Hi, I'm Roger Moore. I'm from the Speech and Hearing Group at the University of Sheffield in the UK. And I'd just like to start off by saying what an honor and a privilege it is to be invited to give a keynote at this week's conference. Thank you very much to the organizers for thinking of me and for inviting me. And I'm sure, like me, many of you are very sad not to be able to be physically present in Naples this week to enjoy face-to-face interaction. Nevertheless, let's see how we go in recording the lecture, and hopefully at the end there'll be an opportunity for live interaction. Okay, so what I was asked to talk about is how are we doing with respect to the possibility of interacting with robots using our voice. So talking with robots, are we nearly there yet? Now, of course, automatic speech recognition or speech technology, speech synthesis, this kind of technology has been around for quite a long time, 40 or 50 years even. And there's been a long line of developments, starting with very simple systems. As you can see here, command and control systems, which, for example, could recognize just a few command words or maybe some isolated digits. Then the field moved on to dictation, which is the idea that you might be able to create documents by voice. Then we saw the prevalence of interactive voice response systems, that's to say telephone answering systems where some automation is provided. And then we've arrived at the current era, which is our voice-enabled personal assistants. So technologies which many of you have experienced, like Siri or Amazon's Alexa, Google Home. These are all personal assistants now, which have really changed the whole landscape of speech technology. And what was once a very exotic technology, that mostly existed in research labs, it's now pretty much in everybody's pocket, even for very, very different languages. So that's kind of where we are now, but people, of course, are looking very much to the future and talking about embodied conversational agents, ECHAs, and then autonomous agents themselves, by which we mean robots. So there's just been the most amazing progress over the years. In fact, it's been, as particularly for something like automatic speech recognition, where the accuracy is everything that matters. There's been a kind of word error rate wars going on. And you can see here, just a couple of years ago, some of the big players like Microsoft and Google slugging it out in the research labs and in the press, claiming that they've got some sort of superhuman or some super recognition rate, and basically trying to outdo each other in this. And so you can see that progress has been amazing in recent times. You may have also heard about this a couple of years ago. Google has created speech synthesis, which is incredibly human-like, and they also put together a dialogue system which was capable of phoning people up and entering into a conversation. So I'm going to, if you haven't come across this, I'm going to play an example now of the Google Duplex system in operation. So what you're about to hear is an interaction between an automated voice-based system and a real human being. And it's the system is playing the role of a customer trying to book an appointment. So let me play it, and just bear in mind that one of these voices is automatic.
So how can I help you?
Hi, I'm calling to book a women's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd.
Sure, give me 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, what time are you looking for around?
At 12 p.m.
We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15.
Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.?
Depending on what service she would like. What service is she looking for?
Just a woman's haircut for now.
Okay, we have a 10 o'clock.
10 a.m. is fine.
Okay, what's her first name?
The first name is Lisa.
Okay, perfect. So I will see Lisa at 10 o'clock on May 3rd.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Great. Have a great day. Bye.
Now, that's absolutely incredible, right? It's the person making the booking is the automated system, and then the person handling the call is a real person. And what you heard is an incredibly naturalistic dialogue. Now, there was quite a lot of fuss in the press about this when it was announced, because people were starting to say, hold on, do we want automated systems which sound like real people phoning other people up? But setting that aside for now, that may be something we can talk about in the Q&A at the end. The performance is absolutely amazing, the handling of the interaction. And as evidence of how good performance is these days, I just simply draw your attention to the subtitles, which are running automatically right now. That's basically automatic speech recognition operating in real time right in front of your eyes at the moment. So progress has been absolutely amazing. And indeed, Siri and Alexa have really changed the whole landscape. So here are some spectacular numbers. Tens of millions of Alexa devices sold just over Christmas in 2017. Google Assistant available in lots of brands and huge numbers of devices. And Siri, over 40 million users, and that's in 2017. Absolutely incredible. So let's summarize where we are then in just the state of the art in speech technology. As I've intimated, there's been steady progress year on year in the accuracy, not just of speech recognition, but also the quality of speech synthesis, as we've just heard. So that's a good thing. Now, how is this? Well, what's been going on, of course, is that computers have been getting more powerful. Speech technology is always at the forefront of machine learning, and so a lot of the latest deep learning techniques have been applied in speech processing and have made huge differences. Of course, for deep learning, you need to train the systems. They have huge numbers of parameters, but that's not a problem anymore, because now that the technology is out of research labs and into the real world, there's a huge amount of real world training data available. So corpora are collected from online usage, and that real data is used to train the parameters of the systems. And then finally, our field has had a lot of benchmark testing, probably 20 or 30 years of benchmark testing. It's not acceptable to just publish how good your algorithm is without reference to any kind of standard data set or standard result. And that has been a state of affairs for, as I say, for 20 or 30 years. And that really has made it very clear which techniques work best. So that's also been a very good thing. Now, here's a statement which you may feel rather ambivalent about. So although we've had all this progress, it's not really come from any wonderful insight into what human beings are doing. And so I've not given that a smiley. I mean, as I say, it depends which field you're in as to whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing. Now, it's also very easy to underestimate the realities of spoken language. So although we've got these very neat component technologies which seem to work very well, it's quite a different matter when we try to put this together to create spoken language-based interaction. So that is actually turning out to be a bit of a problem. And another thing is often said, well, we want to speak to a machine because that's natural. It's not. It's not natural to talk to a machine. Like many of you, I'm sure sometimes one is prone to swear at a machine, but it's not natural to talk to a machine. It's natural to talk to another person. So we've got an issue there. So I want to focus on these 2 points. We're going to go here first, which is about the the richness and the complexity of spoken language, which really, really matters. So, in order to do that, I just want to get into the, we need to move towards robots. So I want to say the following: Alexa, impressive as it is, it's not a robot. Okay, it's just a disembodied personal assistant. And must also, so we must, you know, we need to think away from Alexa and Siri. These are not robots. Robots have lots of other properties which are particularly interesting and relevant to when it comes to imbuing them with spoken language. And likewise, a robot may not be a personal assistant. There's many different robots here. Some are humanoids, some are not. Some are zoomorphics. We've got industrial arms, vacuum cleaners. This is a very wide variety of artifacts, and whether or not we want to talk to them is going to be an issue which has to be understood and resolved. The other thing I want to point out is that speech is not just some other modality. It's not just something that we can bolt on the outside of a robot and just add the speech engines. That's not to say people aren't trying that. Of course they are. But we have to appreciate, in order to achieve something interesting, it's necessary to appreciate that speech isn't just another modality. In fact, speech is, this is a quote here made from two well-known publications. Spoken language is the most sophisticated behavior of the most complex organism in the known universe. And that's really not overstating it. Spoken language is an absolutely amazing faculty which only human beings appear to have, and it is not just an interface into a human being. It's not just a superficial extra modality. Speech hits at the very heart of what it is to be a human being. Okay, so what that means is that we can't simply interface speech state-of-the-art technology with speech technology with state-of-the-art robots. Talking and listening is not enough. We've got to do more than that. Okay, so I want to just develop that idea of the complexity of speech. And I'm going to do that by playing you some speech. Now, you're already listening to some speech, but I want to just play a recording now. This is some people in Sheffield actually having a little conversation. So I just want you to listen to this.
You speak normal English with a slight Sheffield accent, and you speak dialect. If you were annoyed, would you go into dialect or would you stay in straight English?
I'd go into dialect. I'd go into dialect.
Why?
Oh, I don't know. It's just something in me. Just
when I get angry, I'd go, why is man getting me angry?
He will stay in Sheffield and get mad, but I revert. I don't know why. I just use my dialect because I don't know. It's like when my parents, it's probably got it from my parents, because when they got mad, they flipped into their dialect as well. So it's probably I just took it from them. But I prefer it. I prefer it for some reason. That's me why.
Is it something about the way are you able to express yourself better?
Yeah. Less words, but they get to the point quick.
Okay, now I imagine that many of you had a bit of difficulty there. There were only 3 or 4 speakers, but you probably noticed they're speaking with a fairly strong local accent. That is, in fact, the Sheffield accent. And you probably, not only were you perhaps having difficulty recognizing what they're saying and understanding what they're talking about, but if you were looking at the subtitles, you probably noticed that the speech recognizer on my laptop here also having a little bit of difficulty. So already when we are faced with the reality of everyday speech, we can see there are some challenges. Now, what I want to do now is I'm going to play a few tiny clips from what you've just heard. So here's the first one.
With a slight Sheffield accent.
Now, I wonder if anybody noticed what she did first time around. Did you notice that she said and then Sheffield? So stopping and starting and repeating, this is a very normal speech. These aren't speech necessarily regarded as errors. We as human listeners don't even notice these things. Here's another piece. Right. Those are noises that are coming out of people's mouths. And first time around, when you're listening to the whole conversation, you probably didn't realize that that's not speech. I mean, it's not communicative in the sense of words, but it's surely part of the interaction and a crucial part of the interaction.
Why?
And there's a simple word, one word, why. But do you notice how expressive it was? Why? And of course, expression is something that is a very powerful part of spoken language, which, for example, is not in text.
But I revere.
That's brilliant. I love that part. I mean, the guy he's basically emitting sound, but he hasn't quite decided what he's going to say yet. He's filling the space and carrying everything along. From an interaction point of view, this is all going very fluidly. But when you start to look at the individual details, you realize there's a lot of interesting things happening.
I prefer it. I prefer it for some reason.
Another sort of rhetorical repetition. He's not just repeating there by mistake. He's actually repeating for a reason.
Yeah. Less words.
Indeed, more words. So what that just shows us that speech is very rich. There are many things going on. And here's a long list, which I simply don't have time to go into, of all the aspects of speech which really matter when it comes down to processing it by machine. So it's obviously very variable. We've heard different accents, ambiguous. The same words can mean different things. It takes effort. It's possible to speak very clearly, or you can mumble. Speech is contrastive, by which I mean that there's something very special about the way speech is structured to distinguish one thing from another. There's prosody. In other words, the pitch of the voice is changing all the time. The timing is changing. And again, there's a long list here. It's meaningful, obviously. It's referential. You can say things like, put that over here. Well, what's that and what's here? What does that refer to? Paralinguistics, that's just a technical word which talks about the expressivity of speech. So the fact that emotion has come through in speech. And that's not just a sort of an extra, that's a sort of critical part of it. It's how we express ourselves. It's personalized. Everybody's voice is different. And it's multimodal. If you're watching the video of me talking, you probably notice I can't resist moving my hands from time to time. And we often are using our voice in concert with other actions. So bring that to me. You might point at whatever that is referring to. And speech, that example is a fairly clean recording, but you notice people were talking on top of each other. That's very normal. And in a real environment, things get much more complicated. Things are quite contaminated. So here we've got a complex situation, which is very everyday. Multiple individuals, maybe there's a robot in there trying to make sense of things. So it's not just a question of a person talking to a robot. This robot is embedded in a complex, in this case, social and physical situation. The robot's got to figure out who's where, who's talking to who's talking to it. How does it interrupt? How does it gain attention? It's a situated and embodied configuration, and the robot somehow has to understand all of that. Okay, so I really spend a lot of time on that, but I really want just to put over the fact that speech is a complex phenomenon. It is not just a superficial interface. Okay, so why do we want to talk to a robot anyway? So let's tease that out a little bit. And the way I've done that is I've just divided the world up into three broad areas. The physical world, which consists of stuff and things, which gives, provides us with mechanical support, let's say, if we're interacting with a robot. The social world, which is all about agents and relations. We can see things like the provision of emotional support in that area. And then the abstract world of information and data, where we can get support for our mental faculties. So these are just illustrating physical world might be a factory setting. The abstract world might be just talking to a robot to get information. And the social world might be some more fluent interaction with a social robot. So here are a whole bunch of reasons why we might want to talk to a robot. They're spread around, they're sort of loosely connected with these three different worlds. So obviously collaborative working tends to be more, is likely to be more physical. And why would we want to talk to a robot? Well, because we can get things done hands-free and eyes-free by using our voice. It's a classic reason for using speech technology. We can do things, we can pick up things and move things about and read stuff and see what's going on, and nevertheless use our voices to keep control. And managing joint attention if there are multiple players. Multimodality I've already mentioned. And then moving more into the social area, we've got things like companionship, empathy, expressivity, and then into the more abstract world of getting access to information. And in all of this, we can focus on one really important aspect of spoken language and speech, which is that it's a very high rate communication channel compared, for example, to pressing buttons or anything physical. And so it's a very fast way of getting information in and out of a human being. So that's why we might talk to a robot. So the next question is, how? How might we talk to a robot? Well, in the physical world, it's likely to be more sort of command and control, fairly straightforward interactions. And in the abstract world, again, fairly straightforward. In the main, this is not guaranteed, but just a rough approximation. In the abstract world, it's going to be more like questioning and answering, pretty much like we have with the personal assistants we have today. In the social world, it gets a bit more complicated because this is where we are expecting to need to have conversational dialogues, maybe negotiations between partners, between a human being and some kind of artificial agent. Now, the command and control and the Q&A, because they're relatively straightforward, are likely to be pretty much formulaic in terms of their speech acts. Speech act, by the way, is a formal thing. So formulaic speech act would be a very straightforward expression of a desire in the terms of a command or a question, let's say. And I like to call this voice button pressing. So you can imagine it's basically hands-free operation of some keyboard. But conversational dialogue and negotiation, that's something else, right? This is communicative. This is real language, or the technical word here is languaging. And that takes us into a different domain, which makes things a bit more complicated. So let's then ask the question, what is language? In fact, what is language like? Well, for a very long time, the sort of traditional view of language was a bit like a tennis match. All right, so you've got the two interlocutors, the players here, who are essentially passing messages backwards and forwards in a kind of tit-for-tat arrangement. But that's a classic behaviorist stimulus response view of language, and it's very old-fashioned and very much out of favor these days. How people, so we're going to cross that off. How people view language right now is much more as a more intimate, coupled arrangements. It's more about simultaneous, synchronized, interactive behavior, a bit like this three-legged race here. It's about coupling between interlocutors. And so that is a much more modern view of language. And some of those ideas have been picked up already in developing an enactive approach, a coupled systems approach to dialogue. And I want to draw your attention to something which I think is really, or an area of technology which I think is really important here, which is incremental processing. So getting away from the stimulus response, you speak, I speak, you speak, to something a bit more interleaved. This is known as incremental processing. And I'm going to play you an example. There's a lab in Sweden which really specializes in this. And I'm just going to play a video where you're going to hear somebody entering some digits, just entering a digit string, maybe, think of it as a credit card or something. And I want you to see how the system and the person are kind of interleaving in a sort of beautifully coupled and active way, their interaction.
253.
Okay.
145.
Sorry, do you mean 1 and then 40 and then 5?
No, 145.
Okay, 145.
Yeah, and 684.
Okay.
712 9.
So, from the start. 253.
Yeah.
145. 664.
No, 684.
Okay, 684. And then 712 9.
That's right.
So that's very different to dialogue systems that existed prior to this idea of incremental processing coming along. And I think you can immediately see that this could be really nicely extended to cover multimodal interactivity between a human and a robot, that is. So not just about the language, but about all the behaviors that are taking place in a continuous interleaved manner. So we'll come back to that. Okay, so language and languaging, what is it? Well, it's, as we've just seen, continuous dynamic coupled synchrony between predictive cognitive unities. Now that's a complicated expression, but it's essentially pointing out that language reaches right into cognition, and cognition acts as a kind of predictive filter on all behavior. Distributed sense making is the enactive view of language, so essentially a cooperative social process. And these are said to be the core parts of language: ostensive inferential communication and recursive mind reading. Some of these things will come up again in a moment. Meaning grounded, situated in an embodied way. And the emphasis ultimately is not on what people say or what people mean, but it's on pragmatics. In other words, in the context of the situation, what are they trying to do, and what the information that's coming out of their mouths and other actions that are taking place, what does that imply for what the person is intending? And there's also a strong assumption here that participants are members of the same species and share significant priors. In fact, the whole idea of recursive mind reading seems to lie behind the efficiency of language, because when you engage in conversation with somebody, you know an awful lot about their world and they know a lot about your world, and that has a direct impact on the nature of the speech and language that then emerges in an interaction. Okay, so back to the list, the state of the art, and so I just was talking about the complexity of spoken language, and now I want to turn to this other point, which is that it's not natural to talk to a machine. So this is a slide which was given to me by a colleague who set up the company Speechworks some years ago. And it's a very nice, it very nicely captures a key idea. So we've got two dimensions here. We've got flexibility on the horizontal axis and usability on the vertical axis. And this is trying to capture what it might be like to talk to a machine. So at the bottom left-hand corner, you can see we've got structured dialogue. So that's something very simple, maybe a few command words. And obviously at the top right-hand corner, we've got a human being. So structured dialogue, you can't do very much with it, so very low flexibility and not very usable. You have to learn those command words. And then what happened in, particularly when Siri came along, is that the speech recognition and synthesis had some natural language processing and dialogue added, and that took us up a little bit further along a curve here. So such systems like Siri and Alexa, what have you, they're a bit more flexible and a bit more usable. Now the question is, so what's the trajectory here? We're on our way from simple structured dialogue towards ideally human-like interaction. And you can imagine that there's some curve running from bottom left to top right. And what is the shape of the curve? Well, this is the shape of the curve according to my colleague Mike Phillips. Right. So we've got something weird here. The observation is that as you increase the complexity of a spoken language system, something happens, and people, users, get to a point where they really don't know what they can do anymore. They don't know what they can talk about. And so whilst the flexibility may be higher, usability absolutely plummets. And I call this the habitability gap. This is a kind of like a human-computer interaction term. The interaction lacks habitability. People don't know what to do in it. And so we can put the, so here's our tennis match, is sort of back here. And our beautiful coupled three-legged race is kind of up here. And in the habitability gap, we've got a bit of a disaster going on. We've got agents which are somehow their skills are mismatched, and one is falling behind. Now, whether it's the machine or the human being doesn't really matter. The point is we've got something is going on here. Now, I'm sure, since I'm talking to a robotics community, that as soon as you saw this curve, you thought, hold on, I know this curve. And indeed, it is exactly the same curve, coincidentally, to one that you're all very familiar with, which is the famous uncanny valley curve. So I'm assuming everybody knows this, but just in case there's somebody who in the audience who doesn't know, so the uncanny valley basically states that as we increase the human likeness of a robot, there comes a point when it is getting quite close to being human-like that people suddenly, observers suddenly have a very, very negative reaction. And then it's where we see it becomes eerie or uncanny. And that's where we see that curve plummet. And there are two curves there. And the hypothesis by Mori back in 1970 was that the eeriness is amplified if the artifact, the robot in this case, is actually moving. Now, there's been a lot of work on this, and Carl McDorman in particular has done lots and lots of research to show that this effect is real. Having said that, I must also say that some people have investigated the effect and found that and struggled to find it. But certainly McDorman has done a lot of work in morphing between, the example here, morphing between a human being and a robot, and showing that there's a peak in eeriness and confirming Mori's hypothesis. Mori's work was just speculative. It wasn't based on any experiments. Now, this particular piece of work interests me greatly because this is looking at the effect you get when you have a robot or a person and a robotic voice or a natural human voice. And this actually shows that if you've got the wrong mix, if you have a human with a robot voice or a robot with a human voice, that is also eerie. That's going to be very relevant to what we're talking about here. So there's, if you look into the literature for the uncanny valley, there's a very large literature and lots of possible explanations ranging from whether people think an artifact is living or not, and relating it to death in some way. But there's some very particularly interesting ones to me And I did some work on this myself, and some of these here. So mismatch between sensory cues, conflicting perceptual cues, and a category boundary problem. So I'm going to cut quite a long story short to just say that I did some work a few years ago where I developed a quantitative, in fact, the first quantitative model of the uncanny valley, and managed to simulate some of the effects. And the parameters in this model turn out to be very interesting in terms of explaining what's going on. So if you were interested in that, there's a reference to the Nature paper. I'm not going to spend any more time on that, but I just want to take some of the conclusions. So what would be a canny approach? In other words, a non-uncanny approach. And what the model suggests is that in order to avoid it, then we need to minimize conflicting cues. And that means that an agent's affordances need to be aligned. So in other words, what a robot or an agent looks like, what it sounds like, what it's doing, what it appears to know, and how it communicates somehow has to be lined up. And if they're all over the place, so if it's really good at one thing and really bad at another, that is a recipe for diving into the uncanny valley. So aligning the affordances would seem to be key. Now, I hope you appreciate that if you do that, that means that an agent's capabilities are going to be limited. They're going to be capped. They're going to be capped by the lowest common denominator. So if the behaviors are very limited, then that is, and everything else has to be aligned to that, then that has implications across the board. Okay, so that tells us something immediately very interesting, which is maybe we shouldn't be shooting for human-like robots anyway. Maybe we should be going for what you might call mechanomorphic rather than anthropomorphic solutions. And coming right back to speech, that kind of tells you that why are we building systems with human-like voices? We should probably be doing what they do in the media and TV and films, and give robots appropriate robotic voices. And I just want to quote my friend here, Bruce Ballantyne, written a lovely book, if you're interested in this, called It's Better to Be a Good Machine Than a Bad Person. And basically advocating the mechatronic, the mechanomorphic approach. So I've actually done a bit of work in this area to confirm all this, and so here are some results of some limited experiments. I don't have time to go into great detail. You can pick up the reference and check it out if you're desperately interested. But the basic message from these two graphs, the one on the left is showing that if you have a robotic voice in an inquiry system, like a personal assistant, then users, just by hearing the voice, by hearing a voice which is robotic, users immediately adopt a whole different strategy. They change their behavior, they're much more efficient. Strangely, they're also politer. And so it has a direct impact, a positive impact on users having a robotic voice. The stuff on the right is essentially showing that also, if you give an artifact an appropriate voice, then you get the ventriloquist effect, which is that a voice appears to come from an artifact if the voice fits the artifact. And I propose this as a way of testing whether a voice is appropriate to an artifact, because you can. We did experiments with a very simple robot and the voice behind a curtain, and you could move the voice further and further away from the robot without the user realizing. And when the user says or declares that it's not coming from the robot anymore, that gives you a measure of how appropriate the voice is to the robot. It's a neat way of doing things. And again, some of my own work. I was asked to develop the voice for the MiRo robot. Some of you may know this robot. It looks a bit like a little dog, but it's not a dog. It's a MiRo. But it is a mammal. And it is a mammal of a particular body mass. And I developed some code which allows you to predict the vocalization for a mammal of a certain size. It tells you what the fundamental frequency of the voice should be. It tells you how long its vocalization should be. And all of that was plugged into the robot itself. And if you've not heard MiRo, this is MiRo. And you'll see it vocalizing, and you'll hear some of the effective. It also has emotion. You'll see that in the video as well. So you heard the voice change there as it was being stroked and moved into a positive affective state. So I just want to, at this point, there's a paper just came out just in the last couple of weeks, which looks at classifying robots. And so I think the main message here is that the design for the vocalization very much depends on the use case. And I commend this paper to look at different ways, different types of robots and their use cases and how that might impact on vocalization. So getting quite close to the end now, I just want to now raise a rather nasty spectre, which is that I already implied that spoken language requires or is founded on shared experiences and priors. So given that human beings have phenomenal priors and a robot might have very little, that means there's a huge mismatch. And what is the implications of that? And maybe this is the source, one of the sources of the habitability gap. It's not just about what it sounds and looks like. It may be that there's a massive mismatch in what the different agents know about. So how do users know what they can and can't say? This is a real problem. And indeed, there's a nice book by Tom Scott Phillips, Speaking Our Minds. The assumption of continuity between a fully coded communication system at one end and language at the other is simply not justified. So there may be a discontinuity here that we need to worry about. So having said that, human beings are used to speaking to mismatched interlocutors. So of course, adults talk to very, very young children. People communicate despite very big differences in culture, in accent, in language. So maybe that has some relevance to human-robot language-based interaction. But these are conspecifics. You know, they are human beings. And so even though the difference between a small child and an adult is huge, they nevertheless have significant priors. So maybe a better model or a more interesting model would be more like the way in which people talk to their animals. Maybe that's something that we might adopt as a model for human-robot interaction using speech. So, winding up, are we nearly there yet? Well, what I've argued is that systems need to have a much deeper understanding of spoken language, especially the cognitive aspects, empathy, theory of mind, ideas which I've touched on. There needs to be some understanding of the coupling, incremental, continuous, multimodal, incremental coupling between talkers and listeners. We need to embed this and ground it in the real world. It needs to be adaptive to a different situation. We need to have robots where the visual, vocal, and behavioral properties actually reflect what they can do and need to be aligned. And we need to understand how spoken language might actually function when we've got mismatched agents. So are we nearly there yet? Well, we do seem to be missing some very fundamental things. We seem to be missing a fundamental science of interaction in general and vocal interactivity in particular. And you can see a reference there to a review of some of that, which might be of interest to you. So to wind up very quickly, where to find out more about this kind of thing? Well, I organized a Darkstuhl seminar earlier this year, and there's a report available from that, spoken language interaction with virtual agents and robots, SLIVAR, and you can download the report using the link that's there. There's going to be there's a Frontiers special issue on intelligent conversational agents coming out quite soon. I'm organizing a special issue on speech-based interaction for multimodal technologies in interaction. There's a deadline of April next year for that, so if you're keen to get involved, then please make a connection with that. And there's also a robot dialogue workshop coming up. This is now going online, but you can see the web link for that. Also, if you're interested in the whole notion of spoken language and the complexities, I'm actually giving a tutorial at Interspeech. Again, it'll be online this year. Speech 101, what everyone working on spoken language processing needs to know about spoken language. So again, if you're interested, you can sign up for that. My own website is easy to find. There's also a book edited by Judith Markovits, From Talking Listening Robots to Intelligent Communicative Machines, and I have a chapter in there. And again, if you want to access to that, then you just need to contact me. So that's where I'd like to finish. Thank you very much indeed.